And now we have two guests in the studio with us to weigh in on the Paycheck Fairness Act and what it means. Judith Lichtman is Senior Advisor at the National Partnership for Women and Families. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Sabrina Schaeffer, Executive Director of the Independent Women's Forum. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
And Judy, you support the law. Sabrina, you are against the law. So let's start there and talk about women earn 70 cents for every dollar that a man makes. That's on average. And if we look at the numbers for Latinas and African Americans, it's even lower. Judith Lichtman, why?
Well, even if you hold constant all kinds of personal choices like education and occupation, there still remains a very significant wage gap. And that wage gap, sadly, in this day and age, in the beginning of the second decade of the 21st century, is as a direct result of sex discrimination. And there's no getting around it. You can't argue it away. You can't wish it away. The wage gap is a present-day manifestation of sex discrimination in wages, and it's pretty sad that here we are sitting here today arguing about whether or not it's a political fight. It ought not to have anything to do with politics, really. It ought to be a bipartisan leadership effort by everybody to address the vestiges of very significant wage discrimination against women.
Here are the numbers according to the White House. Women earning 77 cents on average to every dollar a man makes. African American women 64 cents and Latina women 56 cents. Sabrina Schaeffer, why do you think there's that difference? And first of all, do you even agree with those numbers?
Yeah, I think that those numbers are highly, exaggerated. I do think that if you control for any number of factors, including things like college major, many women, there's been a great study out of Harvard that if you look at what women choose to major in versus men are looking more at remuneration while women are looking at more at sort of job satisfaction after school. Those things do have impact on your salary and your earnings potential. And I think that if you control for any number of those factors, the wage gap shrinks to almost nothing. And I think that we need to be very careful not to assume that the workplace and society is so openly hostile toward women, and recognize that women have a lot of control over the choices that they're making in their lives, and recognize that sometimes those choices have consequences or have effects, and that's okay.
If you'd like to join the conversation here, phone numbers to call. We have a line specially set up for if you're a woman in the workplace. That line is 202-628-0184. If you're a Republican, you can call us at 202-737-0002. Democrats, 202-737-0001. Independent callers, 202-628-0205. And again, that line for working women, 202-628-0184. Let's take a look at the Paycheck Fairness Act. What do you think is the most important part of it, Judith Lichtman?
Well, I think there are a couple of very important elements. The first is that, unlike today, it will allow women who fear that they are being discriminated against in their wages to not only reveal their own pay, but to ask questions of their peers and their employers free of retaliation. That is very important.
So what is the climate of the workplace now? How do you perceive that people can or can't talk freely about how much money they make?
Well, we know from the example of Lily Ledbetter that your previous caller talked about, that she had no idea she was being discriminated against in wages, that not only was she being paid less than her peers, but she was being paid less than the men that she trained, because asking questions about her pay was absolutely forbidden. She only found out about it after decades of being discriminated against, when somebody anonymously put a note in her locker informing her. That affects not only her ongoing wages, but of course her Social Security, her pensions. The economic consequences to her and her family and to millions of women just like her are not inconsequential, and they are not about choices. And I think Sabrina and I have a really very strong disagreement about what the facts are. If you look at totally neutral U.S. Census reports controlling for education, for occupational choices, for family choices, you still get left with a significant wage gap, and you can't talk it away by any other measure except sex discrimination.
Sabrina Schaeffer.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at what this bill would actually do, which is to expand the definition of wage discrimination. So it makes it just far easier for people to file class action lawsuits, which you may think is a good thing, but in fact that's going to be tremendous costs on businesses. It's going to make it much more difficult to hire women, much more expensive to hire women, and it's going to have a dramatic effect on men's salaries and men's abilities to get bonuses as well. And I think that that's something that, you know, doesn't come, it shouldn't be that we're pitting one sex against the other.
So I fear that Sabrina's facts here aren't right. The long-established Equal Pay Act that was passed and has been law since 1963, and there's nothing about Paycheck Fairness that would change that, says explicitly that you cannot equalize women's wages by hurting men's wages. You have to top up. So in no way would men's wages be hurt. And I don't think saying the sky is falling is at all helpful or useful here. Indeed, I hope there isn't a lot of litigation. I hope there aren't a lot of class actions. I hope employers do the right thing by their women employees. When I came to work for what was then the Women's Legal Defense Fund and now called the National Partnership, everybody had a button that said 59 cents with the international no sign, and everybody wore that button. And here we are almost 40 years later, and 18 cents closure of that gap. Now that's terrible. We as a nation, senators today who are going to decide whether or not to support the women in their states so that they get fair pay, ought not to be wearing buttons that say 77 cents. And that's what this bill does. This bill addresses that persistent, ongoing wage gap due to sex discrimination.
Sabrina Schaeffer, can I get you to respond to something that Judy Lichtman brought up about people being able to discuss how much they make in the workplace? Do you see that as a problem right now? Do you think that there isn't enough conversation about what you earn, what your male colleagues earn?
I don't know. You know, every business is going to be different. It's going to operate differently. What you can be sure of is that with a law like this, things are going to be much more standardized. It's going to make it much more difficult for employers to tie compensation to work product or work quality or the experience or the kind of flexibility that people may want in their work environment. They may be willing to take a lower salary if it means that they get to leave early or work from home part-time or have flex time. I mean, those are all things that are going to be much harder to have with a law like this.
Let's look at some of the details of the Paycheck Fairness Act. As our guests mentioned, employers can't retaliate against employees if they share their salary. Also, employers have to justify why they're paying one person more than another, looking at things like education experience. They have to give actual reasons. It broadens the potential of civil action lawsuits, and then employees can be included in class action lawsuits without written consent, and we can get into the details of that in a moment. It also calls for grant programs to train women and girls in negotiation skills, doing additional research, and trying to help businesses solve problems on their end to help them deal with pay disparity.